He thought I'd walk out with my dignity folded into a cardboard box. But you don't terminate the person who signs the checks, especially not when she's holding the document that rewrites the rules. The boardroom was too quiet. That kind of silence that doesn't feel like calm. It feels like plotting. My heels clicked across the marble like a countdown as I stepped in, 30 minutes earlier than scheduled. No one expected me to show up, especially not after the termination notice was quietly circulated over Zoom. I'd read it twice. Effective immediately. Role eliminated. Benefits end EOD. They didn't even have the decency to pretend it was performance-related. From the corner, Richard, the self-appointed oracle of the company, looked up from his overpriced tablet. "You're early," he said, voice tight with surprise. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Thought I'd get a front-row seat to my own execution. A couple of interns stifled laughs. The others, HR, legal, the new COO, looked everywhere but at me. The scent of lemon polish and cold sweat hung in the air. Everyone was bracing for something, but they had no idea what. 2 weeks ago, I'd have folded. 2 weeks ago, I would have cried in the break room and asked if I could keep my Excel dashboards for reference. But 2 weeks ago, I hadn't found the file. It had been tucked away in legal's shared drive. Equity ownership, updated registry, authorized by board vote. My name, 51%. The kind of percentage that didn't just change your email signature, it changed the table you sat at. That day, I didn't run. I called my lawyer. By the time the full board was seated, I'd laid the document on the table like a weapon, black and white, signed, registered, time-stamped. "Before we begin," I said, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Richard's voice carried that sharp HR-coded edge. "You're no longer an employee." "This is a board only?" "Exactly," I interrupted, sliding the ownership doc toward legal. "And as a majority shareholder, I request entry, per clause 4B of the governance charter." Eyes widened, papers shifted. Someone coughed, micro-cliff incoming. The legal officer, Dana, tapped through the registry. Her fingers paused, froze. The screen reflected in her glasses. I could see it. My name in bold, owner, not staff, owner. "She's right," Dana said slowly. "Effective 3 days ago, filed and approved." The COO paled. Richard leaned forward like he could reverse the moment with posture alone. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "And I have." The tension in the room was sharp enough to carve names into polished wood. They thought they could erase me, quietly, cleanly, but they forgot something crucial. When you're the majority, you don't need permission to exist. Now, they'd have to sit across from me, not as their subordinate, as their equal, or worse, their superior. Because I wasn't there for revenge. I was there to make sure none of them ever did this to another woman again. And that was just the first move. Next board meeting, I'll be setting the agenda. You won't believe what she does at that board meeting. They tried to skip me on the call. The first board meeting since my termination, now legal ownership reinstatement, was scheduled with zero mention of my name on the calendar. Classic Richard move. Pretend a threat doesn't exist, and maybe it'll go away. Unfortunately for him, the legal registry had already updated my status, so when the board Zoom lit up, 6 glossy faces blinking into their ring lights, and I quietly joined as owner_51%_A.V. The silence was poetry. Angela," the CFO stammered, "didn't realize you'd be attending." "I'm required to, actually," I said, smiling just enough to keep it civil. "Per registry update, which I'm sure legal can confirm." Dana, poor thing, looked like she wanted to disappear into her virtual background of the Golden Gate Bridge. Yes, it's confirmed. The agenda was a slow bleed. Numbers, projections, blah blah, strategic pivots. But they weren't watching the slides, they were watching me. I could feel it, the way they paused just long enough before each line item, hoping I'd leave or go on mute or vanish altogether. Instead, I spoke up. On item 4, cost optimization. Through role consolidation, a pretty phrase for layoffs, I raised my voice just slightly. I have a question, I said. Whose roles are being consolidated exactly? Names? Departments? Silence. The new COO, Kelly, tried to maintain composure. We're focusing on non-essential mid-level functions. Define non-essential, I said, with examples. Richard cleared his throat. Angela, if you'd prefer to discuss this offline. No, Richard, I'd prefer transparency. It's a board meeting. Let's treat it like one. Another micro crack in the ice. I wasn't just present, I was shifting the temperature in the room. Every word I said pressed on the bruise they'd tried to pretend wasn't there. They hadn't just fired a woman. They'd fired the woman who now had the legal right to question every decision they made. The second half of the meeting took a turn. Next item, said Dana, barely audible, is the quarterly audit review. There are discrepancies in Q2 consulting payments. I looked up. Discrepancies? She hesitated. Payments to an entity that doesn't appear in our vendor registry. The chat pinged. I clicked. A file. A PDF. Consult Echelon Group. Q2 statement.pdf. $87,500. No contract. Signed off by Richard. I'd like to motion a vote, I said, voice calm, clipped. That we conduct a full audit of Echelon Group and suspend all payments until further documentation is provided. You don't have authority. I own 51%, I said simply. Would you like me to recite the rights that come with that? Click. My mic went off, but the damage was done. The motion was logged. They'd wanted to bury me in red tape. Instead, I'd unspooled it and tied it into a noose for their shady dealings. And I wasn't done, not even close, because this wasn't a seat at the table anymore. This was my table, and I was about to rearrange the entire damn room. They underestimated what she found next, and who was behind it. Curious what she uncovers next. Hit follow, so you don't miss the unraveling. The next morning, a manila envelope arrived on my doorstep. No return address, no sender. Just my name, typed in that overly formal, Times New Roman font they always seem to use in court summons and bad breakup letters. I opened it with the kind of caution normally reserved for venomous snakes and internal HR memos. Inside, a copy of a contractor invoice and an old photo. The invoice was for Echelon Group. Amount $262,000. Dated 6 months prior to my role elimination. Signed by someone named L. Carr. I didn't recognize the name, but the photo, that made my blood run cold. It was from the company's leadership retreat in Tulum last year. A wide shot of the team sipping cocktails poolside. Nothing suspicious, unless you knew who wasn't supposed to be there. Because seated on a lounger, sunglasses low, was Richard. And next to him, half-turned, hand on his arm, L. Carr, listed in our system as external legal advisor. Inactive. Inactive, my ass. I couldn't call anyone, not yet. I needed more, something undeniable. So I went to the office, not the official HQ. No, that place had tighter badge security than Fort Knox. I went to the satellite storage unit down in Chelsea. The one most execs forgot existed because it didn't house anything digital, just filing cabinets, paper archives, and the smell of mildew-covered secrets. I still had the key. Under a flickering light and years of dust, I found it. Cabinet 7A. External Vendor Agreements. A folder labeled Legal Services Strategic Partnerships. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of NDAs, contractor sign-offs, and hidden within, a letter, handwritten, on company letterhead. Keep this off official records, just invoice it under comms consulting. R. Even his initial was arrogant, but now I had everything: paper trail, payments, photo evidence, and intent, in his own damn handwriting. Back at home, I scanned everything, uploaded it to a secure cloud folder, shared access with my lawyer. Then I did something unexpected. I drafted an email. Subject line: ethics violation, urgent board review, sent to every member of the board, including Richard. Within 2 minutes, my phone rang. "Angela," he said, voice gravelly. "Let's talk." I smiled to myself. "Oh, now you want to talk?" There was panic under his tone, though he tried to bury it. "Don't escalate this. It'll blow over. We'll clean it up internally." "Like you tried to clean me out of the registry?" Silence. "I'm offering you an option," he said eventually. "We handle this quietly. No legal action. We both walk away clean." I leaned back, letting his desperation fill the line. "No, Richard. We don't walk away clean. You ran this place like it was your private kingdom. But this kingdom, it belongs to the people who built it, and I'm done letting tyrants write the history." They erased me. Now I'm writing myself back in, one exhibit at a time. They tried to call an emergency session. Without me. A 5 p.m. informal sync for board members only, organized with less than 2 hours' notice. No agenda. No calendar invite to my inbox. They must have thought I'd be too busy nursing my pride or too distracted chasing legal threads. But I'd already set up internal notifications with IT. Any board activity triggered an alert. So while they settled into the sleek glass conference room on floor 27, whispering conspiracies over catered sushi, I was already logged into the security feed from the floor below, earbuds in, listening. "If we move quickly, we can restructure before Q4, Kelly whispered. "Spin it as market adaptation. Angela's interference is giving investors cold feet." "She's not on this call, is she?" the CFO asked, glancing toward the camera. "No, I scrubbed the invite. This is contained." Contained? The word clanged around my ribs like a prison door. That's what they thought I was. Something dangerous, cornered, something to be controlled. I clicked open a blank email. Subject: per bylaws, invalid meeting, recorded evidence attached. Attached a screenshot of the board feed. Dana's face mid-bite, Richard pointing at a chart that didn't exist. Then I joined the call. The silence was nuclear. My face popped onto the shared screen mid-sentence. "Please continue," I said. "I'm particularly interested in this containment strategy." Kelly's mouth hung open. Someone dropped their chopsticks. Richard closed his laptop. Slowly, like that would unsend the betrayal already happening in real time. "You're not authorized," the CFO started. "Actually, per Section 3A of the bylaws, all board deliberations must include all recognized members with decision rights. That would be me." Dana spoke up quietly. "She's correct." And then I twisted the knife just a little. "I've also CC'd external counsel. I'd like the minutes from this attempted session logged and distributed." They ended the call in under 5 minutes, but it was enough. I didn't need a big dramatic speech or revenge served hot. I just needed the truth to suffocate them in their own boardroom. Later that evening, a new file appeared in my inbox. Anonymous sender. The title? Chair Succession Memo. Draft. And guess whose name wasn't on it? Richard's. It was beginning. The walls weren't just cracking, they were folding in. I arrived at the office early, not because I had to, Owners rarely arrive. But I wanted them to feel it, the discomfort, the shift, the presence of someone they couldn't sideline with a form or a meeting exclusion anymore. The receptionist blinked twice. "Ms. Varela, we weren't informed you'd be coming in today." "I didn't come to be informed," I replied, smiling without warmth. "I came to be remembered." I walked past her, heels steady on the marble. The sound echoed like a metronome counting down someone else's time now. Upstairs, I took the long route, through departments that used to greet me with nods and half-hearted smiles. Now, they were standing straighter, a few even whispering "good morning," like they'd just remembered who signs the funding approvals. Funny what ownership does. Funny what power does when you don't have to beg for it anymore. My first stop was the glass-walled office Richard used to call his war room. The plaque was still there. Richard Fontaine, Executive Chair. I opened the door without knocking. It was empty, cleared, cold. But I wasn't here to move in. I was here to take it apart. On the desk sat a locked drawer, the kind with a fingerprint scanner, outdated tech if you knew the right vendor, which I did. 2 calls, a quiet IT favor, and a line about security integrity later. It popped open with a beep. Inside, a burner phone, a printed spreadsheet labeled Silent Payouts, Comms Strategy. And a thumb drive. The spreadsheet was worse than I expected. Names, amounts, email headers, NDAs signed under pressure. 2 names stood out. One, an intern I mentored last year. She left suddenly, no explanation. The other, a former board member, disappeared quietly after personal misconduct allegations. Now I knew why. Back in my temporary office, the legal suite downstairs, freshly assigned after the registry update, I plugged in the thumb drive. A folder blinked open. Internal only. Reputation containment protocols. There were scripts, pre-drafted statements for media leaks, fake timestamps, even a mock apology Richard had written for a VP if the HR investigation ever went public. He never sent it, because the investigation never happened, because he made sure of it. This wasn't just corporate strategy anymore. It was systemic rot, rooted in fear, polished by fake transparency, and hidden under thick layers of legal jargon. But now I had sunlight, and rot dies under sunlight. I drafted 2 letters, one to the board, formal, factual, with attachments and subject lines that would rattle even the most hardened executives. The other, to her, the intern, just a few lines. "I found the file. I believe you. You're not invisible anymore." I clicked send. And as the email left my screen, I realized something. This wasn't my comeback. It was my beginning. 2 hours after I sent the files, my phone buzzed. Unknown caller, blocked ID. I answered anyway. "Angela, it's me." It was Dana, legal. Her voice was uneven, like she'd been running or unraveling. "I need to meet. Not on company channels. Not here." I paused. "How much do you know?" "I've known for months," she said, almost whispering. "But Richard locked down access. HR buried complaints. He said if I raised anything, my license would be under review." Silence stretched between us. "Where?" I finally asked. "There's a cafe on 9th, no cameras, no Wi-Fi." Of course there was. The place smelled like burnt espresso and fear. Dana looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. No suit, no makeup, just a thumb drive and a paper bag that probably wasn't holding a sandwich. "He used offshore accounts," she said, sliding the drive across the table like contraband. "But the routing ends in our trust accounts. He's been funneling it through internal marketing budgets." "Does the board know?" She shook her head. "Some suspect. But no one will speak." I opened the bag. Inside, A printed email chain. Internal threads marked private, do not forward. A copy of a vendor contract with forged initials. And a resignation letter. Dana's. "I'm leaving," she said, "but I won't disappear like the others." I studied her face, the tightness around the eyes, the exhaustion in her shoulders. She wasn't scared for herself. She was scared for who they'd target next. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I worked. I built the timeline, laid out every signature, every falsified expense, every altered registry entry. I mapped Richard's digital fingerprints like a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a fire. I called in favors, pulled audit logs, used access protocols they thought I'd never touch. By sunrise, I had what I needed, an internal briefing, one that couldn't be ignored. Subject line: urgent, governance violation and fiduciary breach, immediate board vote required. Attached, Exhibits A through H, an audio snippet, Dana corroborating, and a single-line summary that would split the foundation. The executive chair has violated board trust, legal boundaries, and financial ethics. Immediate removal proceedings are advised. At 9:07 a.m., my inbox lit up. Board response: motion to remove Richard Fontaine as executive chair. Vote initiated. 6 minutes later, seconded. By noon, I received a final ping. Vote passed 7-1, effective immediately. I sat back. No applause, no victory song, just silence, the kind that comes after a storm when the air tastes like copper and something new begins to rise. Richard was gone, and not in the way he'd planned for me. The news didn't break, it exploded. By 3 p.m., whispers were already leaking through industry Slack channels and group chats. Did you hear what happened at Crestwell? Richard Fontaine, out, like gone. No public statement yet, just vanished from the board site. And me? I was in a quiet office watching the empire tremble. I didn't make a press release, didn't tweet a victory lap, because this wasn't about spectacle. This was about signal. Let them wonder, let them fill the silence with guesses and theories. The truth would land soon enough, and when it did, I wanted it to speak louder than any headline ever could. But not everyone was quiet. An hour after the vote, I got a call from the acting chair, a woman named Marlene, sharp, seasoned, and, until now, comfortably passive. "Angela," she began, "I think we need to discuss direction." "Direction?" I echoed, amused. "You've made your point," she continued, careful, political. "But Crestwell can't operate under a shadow of internal warfare. We need to preserve trust." I almost laughed. "Trust?" I said. "Tell me, Marlene, where was that sentiment when I was locked out of my own ownership rights? When Richard funneled payouts through shell vendors and half the board nodded along in silence?" She hesitated. "There were suspicions. And you sat on them." Silence. "I'm not here for theatrics," I said. "I'm here for structural reform, transparency, accountability, and no more seats being filled by ghosts in suits." Another pause, and then, reluctantly, "What do you propose?" I smiled. "I'm glad you asked." The next morning, a memo went out. Subject: Board Ethics Restructure Phase 1. It included mandatory third-party audit reviews of all expenditures over $10,000, a new anonymous reporting channel, routed externally review of all vendor relationships within the past 18 months, and a re-vote on every executive leadership role, including mine. Let them see I wasn't here to crown myself queen. I was here to burn the old throne and build a round table. By week's end, the ripple turned tidal. 3 executives resigned to pursue other opportunities. 2 more were quietly removed by vote. And Dana? I offered her a role. Ethics Compliance Lead. She accepted with 3 words: "Let's do better." I walked through the halls now, and something had shifted. Not fear, not deference, respect. The quiet kind that doesn't need meetings or memos. The kind that said, "You weren't supposed to survive, but you did, and now you're leading." The building felt different, not physically. The same cold steel elevators, same overwatered ficus in reception, same hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But energy had memory, and this place remembered the storm. I walked through the executive wing as if I'd never left, but this time no one avoided eye contact. They looked, some nodded, some smiled, some simply moved out of the way. Funny. A few months ago, I was escorted out under the cold gaze of procedure. Now, I walked like gravity owed me interest. In the boardroom, the chairs were rearranged. The plaque had changed. Angela Varela, acting chair, Crestwell Board of Directors. I didn't ask for the title. They gave it. Because after everything, no one else had the spine or the receipts to take the wheel. But I wasn't here for ceremonial power. I was here to build what they'd tried so hard to silence, a company with a conscience. The first order of business, hearing the silenced. We opened the anonymous reporting channel. In 72 hours, we received 46 submissions. Not all were criminal, but every single one told a story of neglect, gaslighting, abuses of hierarchy painted as ambition. One note stood out. "I stayed silent because I thought I was alone, but she came back, so maybe we're allowed to speak now." It hit harder than the vote, because I hadn't come back just to win. I'd come back to give permission to those still in hiding. The second move, cleaning house. Vendor contracts were terminated. Ghost consultants, gone. Every dollar had to prove its worth or walk out with a box. Marlene resisted at first. Continuity is stability, but I countered, continuity got us here. I'd rather risk turbulence than keep sailing toward rot. She didn't argue again. Week 3, I made the call. The intern, Lila, the one who disappeared without goodbye. She picked up, voice tight, guarded. "Lila, it's Angela. I just wanted to say, I saw the file. I saw what they did. And if you ever want to talk or if you want a seat, it's yours." Silence. Then, "No one's ever called to say that before." "I know," I said softly, "but someone should have." After I hung up, I stared at the skyline from the 30th floor. The city stretched wide, unapologetic, alive, like me. They buried me in paperwork. I came back with the pen. 3 months after the vote, Crestwell looked the same from the outside, but inside, it was no longer a glass tower of silence. You could feel it in the elevators, people talking freely, not whispering. You could see it in the meetings, fresh faces at the table, not just recycled titles in better suits. You could hear it in the emails. "Thank you for speaking up. Glad someone finally said it. Never thought I'd see the day." What had once been a boys' club in tailored armor was now porous, human, and still under renovation. I stood in the same room where Richard had once called me a redundancy. Now, I was leading a workshop for mid-level managers on leadership that doesn't humiliate to control. We discussed real ethics, not checkbox compliance. What trust looks like when it's practiced, not performed. A woman in the back raised her hand. "You ever regret staying?" she asked. "After what they did?" The question caught me, not because it was harsh, but because it was fair. "I didn't stay," I said. "I rebuilt. Staying would have meant pretending nothing happened." A beat of silence, then she nodded. "Thank you." Later that evening, in the board lounge, I pulled out the old ownership document. the one I'd held up that day, when they tried to erase me with a single signature. 51% looked different now. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key, not to power, but to access, to influence, to rebuild from the bones out. And I wasn't the only one holding keys now. I'd made sure of that. The next board meeting, the agenda was simple: voting in 2 new directors from historically excluded backgrounds. Final approval on the whistleblower protection policy sunset clause for all legacy contracts predating the equity update reinstatement offer to 2 wrongfully exited employees, including Lila. And then 1 final line item, added anonymously through our new governance portal. Motion to retire the executive chair role entirely. Suggest flatboard model. No one knew who added it, but I smiled, because that's what change looks like, when it spreads beyond your voice, when others pick up the thread. Crestwell wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a company with windows and light. And as I stood there, watching the votes roll in, I realized this was never about revenge. It was about returning what was stolen and handing it to the next in line. It started and ended with a form. A termination notice slipped across a desk with sterile hands and a practiced line. Your role is eliminated. But roles are replaceable. People with receipts, not so much. And now, sitting across from a fresh-faced founder seeking advice on their first board structure, I realized something. They never saw me coming because they never saw me at all. That was their first mistake. Their last was thinking I'd stay gone. "Any last advice?" the founder asked, nervous fingers tapping a moleskin. I paused, then leaned forward. "Don't build a fortress," I said. "Build a system that can survive you. Build something honest, even when no one's watching." They nodded, writing it down like it was gospel. I almost laughed. Once, I would have done the same. Later, alone in the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the brushed steel. Not the same woman who once packed up her things in silence, not the one who begged HR for clarity or legal for kindness. No, this version knew her worth and wrote it into policy. This version didn't fight for her seat at the table. She built her own table and left room for more chairs. Back in my office, the sunset hit the city in streaks of gold and fire. I closed my laptop, took a breath, then pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, blank, unclaimed, full of possibility. It wasn't the end, it was succession, a legacy not of titles, but of change. And this time, I wasn't signing a termination, I was signing the future.